So what are some key characteristics of just-in-time provisioning? For us, when we look at it, the way IT infrastructure has been provisioned for many years has been you provision for long-term, 1-3-year contracts, and that infrastructure pretty much sits in place. You provision for what you think the top level of your utilization of that infrastructure is going to be, and then a lot of it goes to waste during downtimes when there's no utilization of it. So from our mindset, the first point is to make sure that you can allocate resources as needed on a on-demand basis to solve production problems or to solve a production task. The second one, which we'll talk about a little bit more in detail today, and that is taking advantage of commodity resource pools that are now starting to come together in the IT industry, especially around clouds and cloud service providers. But we're going to talk about how the network providers are finding themselves in the same kind of situation, and they're looking for ways to actually sell the excess capacity that they have in a more consumable manner. It basically involves a predefined framework or some mechanism so that multiple infrastructure partners can come together and create an end-to-end solution on the fly. So that it assumes a lot of business relationships are taken care of, as well as technical interfaces are taken care of. And then finally, first and foremost in our mind, because of scale issues, it's about programmatic provisioning, being able to trigger those provisioning commands in a completely automated way. So why would we care about just-in-time provisioning? I think in this industry, what we're seeing right now is the economics of cloud infrastructure and of these commodity infrastructure pools are just becoming too compelling for us to be able to ignore. We also know that there's a massive amount of investment that's going on in the service provider industry, both on the cloud side as well as the network side, and really it would be to your advantage, especially as asset sizes continue to grow, to be able to take advantage of that or leverage those capital investments that are happening right now. And then finally, something we keep hearing over and over again in the industry is how do we actually make sure that everybody who's participating in a given production is paying their part? I know that there's a lot of ways that happens today in the traditional manual processes, but the question is how do we get that to where when we do these programmatic things that everybody is kind of carrying their weight of the production cost. So of everybody's interest is always how do we reduce cost, and there's a little cycle that we kind of have learned over the years, and that is you start to get more granular and abstract the problem from large amounts of predetermined resource types and down into smaller and more consumable bytes. And then once you abstract those things, then what starts happening is pools of general purpose infrastructure start to form, and then you actually get a commoditization of those pools. So, what we really want to do is kind of take a look at where we are in the cycle of that in some of these different types of infrastructure and start to figure out when the right time for us to jump in and actually leverage or take advantage of those scenarios. You can kind of see, we could start back from the early days of data center. We've always had this concept of physical infrastructure, right? Servers, compute, storage, and network circuits. Point to point typically. And the first level of abstraction that really came along back in the VMware days and the idea of hypervisors, we couldn't quite get to a point to where people were thinking about the problem they were trying to solve because we're very uncomfortable. They were used to buying things that had a boundary. It was a box. And so what we had to do was basically replicate what was happening in the real world with physical servers and circuits and everything into some type of virtual construct that looked like that and was managed like that, could use the same provisioning tools that we had at the time. But in reality, that allowed us to start actually making better utilization of the resources that we had, but it wasn't really getting us to a point to where we could kind of consume these resources in an on-demand manner at a very granular level. And so what comes along next is the cloud companies started to put in these resource pools for storage and for compute where you could utilize them in very small, granular manner, very limited time frames. And the cool thing about that is then all of a sudden you start to abstract the thing that you're provisioning from the original way that you thought about it and servers and whatnot into these virtual constructs which have been created, which are outside of boxes and everything else. And that's things like platforms split off as their own type of service, with a software package, and you can run in an abstracted manner on these frameworks, or networks functions like firewalls and routers and switches can now be virtualized so that they only handle the traffic flows that they need to handle, and you can apply policy and so forth, and various other things. Storage is undergoing a huge change right now with storage as a service and object stores, where I no longer have to think about how big of a LUN am I provisioning to do something. I think about that thing that I'm putting into storage as an actual object, and I just have an addressable location to get to it when I need it. And so there's a lot of sea change in the way people think about provisioning their infrastructure. And all the while, what you have is this continual pressure on all of us as IT professionals to do more with less and spend less money to get more infrastructure or more capability or throughput through that infrastructure. And at the same time, a really cool thing is happening, which is the original way that we used to manage infrastructure, which is consoles and a human being having to sit down and actually go through the provisioning process of that infrastructure, started to change as this infrastructure started to become more and more abstract. And then you went into frameworks, like vCenter and other things, and then you went into actual APIs, to where it's like, I have a function, and I want to call that function directly, and I want that function to give me a result, but that's all I really care about. I don't care about the sausage getting made underneath. I don't care about provisioning all of that. So as this efficiency pressure goes, what we see is the abstraction and then commoditization of the resources which serve those functions. And that's kind of the perfect storm that we're in right now. So cloud services have been extremely disruptive to other industries, and I have no doubt that it's going to continue to disrupt this industry as well. And we'll see a lot about that at this NAB. But in a very interesting manner, we can actually look back at the very short period of time that Amazon and now Azure and Google and all of these non-traditional service providers have started building cloud resource pools or infrastructure pools. And even in a short period of time today, you started to see some maturation of the different puzzle pieces. So platform as a service is relatively mature. I mean, you've got companies like Oracle and Salesforce out there selling entire platform offerings in on-demand fashion over the internet or over private interconnectivity. The same with infrastructure as a service. So obviously you can go and rent spot instances in AWS, or you can get some Google Compute instances, and you can pay for them as you need them. There are even different classes of them. So if you have some that need to be dedicated for a period of time, or you just want to bid and try to get the lowest price. So you're starting to see these interesting marketplaces come up. And then storage as a service is becoming very, very mature as well. We now have third-party companies that are coming in and actually putting storage units in place and then parceling those out with your security policies and everything else on them, where you don't have to make a capital investment at all to get enterprise class storage and access it in any manner you want to, any number of personalities, from open source Swift type interfaces to being able to do cloud services over Fiber Channel or iSCSI. But the piece of the puzzle that's been missing for quite a while has been the network service providers. So we have this incredible engine that drives everything that we do, because we have to get assets moved around. And yet the network service providers for the longest period of time have had a very archaic provisioning mechanism. It's almost like they're stuck back in the, let's think about servers and storage arrays and other things of that nature. So all of that's starting to come together. And right now, I think over the past year and a half, you've seen network service providers starting to realize that they need to move into a new way of provisioning their services. So when I say leverage wireline investment, this is something that's really important to get across to everybody in the industry. Right now, this is just for the U.S. investment alone from 2010 to 2013, $28 billion a year. It started going down a little bit in 2011 and 2012, but it's back strong as of 2013, and then we're actually seeing probably a higher, around 35 to 40 billion wireline infrastructure being done this year, investment in wireline infrastructure. The global market is about $141 billion this year on wireline infrastructure alone. That's cable and wireline services. So remember, that's taking out that incredible growth curve that mobility is having, which is even a larger chunk of spend now. This is just basic fiber and copper services in the ground, almost exclusively fiber, really. And these investments are being done to feed this cloud feeding frenzy, as we like to call it, but also to try and capture new types of market and new types of access. So from that perspective, what happens when you have a massive amount of capital invested, but you have these spotty consumption patterns that occur from people who are consuming the cloud? You start to get commoditization. You have a lot of infrastructure that's sitting in the ground, and it's not at 100% peak efficiency at all times. And so the service providers are thinking, you know, I've got a lot of capital there. I've got to do something to get a return on this investment. So they're saying, okay, why don't we think about new ways of making that capacity available so that people who are using these types of ad hoc or on-demand provisioning strategies will actually come to us and utilize our fiber in the ground rather than our competitors. So this has kind of left a great opportunity right now for people in this industry and really across the entire IT industry, especially if you have large amounts of data that you need to move around. What we're seeing is there's a capacity glut that's occurring on both the metro side, that's people who are providing lit buildings of Metropolitan Ethernet service, as well as in the point-to-point WAN side. So that's going between metro markets, like from DC to Silicon Valley or Silicon Valley to LA. And there's a couple of different reasons that's occurring. So there's a crazy gold rush kind of going on right now in the metro side because everybody wants to have lit buildings, and those lit buildings, because we can use Ethernet as an aggregation and access method, you know, you can turn up services really quickly. You can do application of certain types of parameters to flows that are going to occur over that service. And you can do all of those easily, and with the newest equipment, you can do it in a programmatic way. So right now, as there are companies like Zayo who are just buying markets in order to get footprint, you can take advantage of that because a lot of your locations and even shoot locations are starting to pop up in the wired building list now. We're talking about in our Equinix facility alone, throughout the globe, we have about 9.5 million buildings under footprint, and that number grows incredibly month over month. So that means that there's already 9.5 million buildings out there that are cross-connected with Ethernet services back to an Equinix facility in that metro that you can take advantage of. Long-haul capacity is being crunched right now. So traditionally, the big money that service providers made was on private IP networking or on being able to do transit. But you see transit prices are starting to go to where they're almost nothing there. So the wireline providers started moving into private IP, trying to protect their margins, and that's a very service-oriented business and relied upon SLAs and everything else. But now that people are moving their infrastructure into the clouds, and the cloud service providers have said, you know what, I'll just run some fiber between my own facilities and provide replication between the regions. So a lot of those workloads that we used to give to AT&T, to Verizon, to XO, or Level 3, those workloads are actually just going over this private infrastructure that the cloud providers are giving to their customers. So storage replications, database replications, and other things. And they have this amazing capacity that they've built for an IT generation, 10 years ago, that now is not being utilized to its fullest extent. So we have companies that are coming to us and saying, you know what, I can do you an on-demand wave service between metros. That was unthinkable 5 years ago. And they're going, can you do anything you can do to help us to get these waves out there in people's hands and actually start using them? So these are two really big trends that we're seeing that are giving us an excess of capacity, or what I like to call a resource pool in the networking space. And then, so what the service providers are trying to do is, how do they solve the problem of getting that into your hands in the quickest and most efficient manner possible? So they want to reduce their opex as always, and they're looking at ways to allow programmatic access, so you can turn up and down the bandwidth as needed. But they also are looking at ways of opening up their provisioning model, so it doesn't take you calling into a salesperson and provisioning some bandwidth. which takes a 30 to 60-day cycle, but actually having interfaces so that you can have that provisioned on the fly via APIs. And this is a great thing for this industry, and I think it's really going to change the way that we consume resources. So today, the state, remember I was talking about the puzzle pieces, and we're missing that technical puzzle piece of the networks. But if you look at it, you actually have a lot of inefficiency, the things that are drawn out with red lines. And this is just very basic abstraction of this, but you wind up with a pool of administrators, human beings, and those administrators are there because they have to run the gauntlet to get through manual provisioning processes and call people and check capacity and all these other things. And you're going to tell them, hey, I want a topology built, and they've got to go out and they've got to get on consoles and do it, and they're ordering routers for you and everything else. And it really does get to a point to where there's inefficiencies that are built into the system that don't match the efficiencies that are happening on the right-hand side of the system right now. So today with the cloud, you can go to AWS, you can go to Azure, you can swipe a credit card, boom, you're up. You've got a full 3-tier infrastructure in there. You've got what you need. You've got platforms as a service. You've got internet connectivity. The whole thing is just jamming along. But you're still waiting for your administrators and everybody to get things going. The other part of the problem that you have is most of the tools that you're using today to interface with your content have nothing to do with this part of anything at all. So what those are, your workflow tools, they're having to wait for that cycle to finish so that they can then work across a static infrastructure. And they're using rudimentary mechanisms in a lot of cases, doing folder watches and stuff because there's no signaling going back and forth out of the network. And it's just making for a less efficient way of doing services than we could be doing. So new way in the future as SDN is coming along is we actually do a couple of different things which make for very interesting efficiencies. The first one is by taking this software-defined networking paradigm to its limit, we can actually build APIs. We can build individual APIs that let you be very granular in what you want provisioned, where, and when. We can also build orchestrated APIs. So you can say, you know what, I have a template for doing something. It involves connectivity from this location to this location and connectivity to this cloud and building up a server in that cloud and so on and so forth. And you can actually take these templates and apply them to the network and build your infrastructure on demand in a very rapid fashion. And even better now, because these APIs, which are RESTful and easily consumed by people who are doing development, both of web infrastructure and dedicated compute platforms, we can do things like take our workflow systems and actually have those workflow systems trigger those APIs when you have a creative who wants to do something. And they don't even know what they're asking you to put infrastructure in. They just say, here are the endpoints that I need. Here's the level of service that I need across there. Push a button through the interface that I have in my workflow and have it go out and actually provision this infrastructure. So this is a massive change again in the way that we start thinking about how do we set up infrastructure for a given production, and then more importantly, how do you start to push out some of that choice and some of that capability to different members of the organization who are more directly affected by the provisioning of that infrastructure. Abstraction means complexity. Complexity drives a plethora of tools. But I like to think about things. I think about data, and I think about systems, and I think about configurations as, really it's a collection of resources that are kind of glued together by different interfaces. But then you have different views of that data through different tools. In the end, all of your tools that you use, whether your administrators use them, whether your creatives use them, or anything else, they should be able to see that infrastructure from their perspective. And what we're seeing is a proliferation of really, really good tools out there. I've given some examples in here, from the user view or for the creative view. They're looking at the workflow. So the workflow tools are starting to really come together now and provide more and more functionality to those creatives. Yet the administrators have a lot more complexity to manage across their infrastructure. So they need more tools and dashboards that give them an idea of how all these different just-in-time solutions are performing, and also allows them to do service assurance across those, because remember, a lot of that infrastructure is just from a resource pool. They don't even necessarily own it. So that service assurance part is really important. And you're seeing a ton of consoles across everybody that does workload monitoring and workload migration. Workload might be something that's a certain activity, or it might be a compute instance or something else, and you want to move it from one place to the other and run it in different infrastructure because there's a cost variable there, and so on and so forth. So administrators are getting these incredible frameworks right now, and these are commercialized frameworks, just the ones that I've listed, and there's tons more out there. Platform as a service frameworks, those are really becoming a big deal right now as people are taking their applications, and they're already pre-built applications, and they're saying, you know what, every time I do a production, I need to run this one application. But when I'm not in a production, I don't need it installed anywhere. I don't want to be paying for infrastructure until the next production needs it. So you've got these great things like Docker, Azure Cloud Services, Google App Engines, which allow you to take your applications and then put them in these frameworks, and then you can move them around and run them wherever you need to based upon the capability, the capacity, the availability of that infrastructure. And then finally, network provisioning is really becoming virtualized and programmatic with SDN, but it's also the ability to take your network functions, your gateways, your routers, your firewalls, your policy engines, everything that you need, run those in virtual infrastructure, either on the device itself, so you can carve up a switch or a router that supports these things, or through service pools that we create outside of that that actually will work to scale, so that you can do all kinds of different services that you couldn't do before. Think about if every connection into and out of your network was NATed on demand as needed. Didn't matter what the capacity that you needed at any given point in time, because you always had a resource pool of capability that allowed you to NAT. That is the kind of thing that people have been looking for quite a period of time, and we think that the market is finally responding with the right tools and capabilities. Abstracted tools obviously need a place that you can apply those tools, and we call them exchange points. Obviously, within Equinix, we run a lot of exchange points, but a lot of our competitors and cooperative competitors as well also run different types of exchange points. And up to this point, no pun intended, those exchange points have been very basic or rudimentary. You know, come together, we can do some basic peering, we can do some VLANs between us, and that allows the service flows to go. But it really doesn't deal with or handle this idea that you're actually asking for infrastructure to be set up and those exchange points to be set up on the fly for a given production. And it might have different actors or participants in that production at that point in time. So not only are you looking for a centralized kind of a hub or neutral point that you can provision all these things, but they need access to a whole bunch of resource pools, compute resource pools, storage resource pools, networks, and network resource pools. And in order for an exchange point to work well, you've got to make sure you've got all that together. So I did... I really hate animations. I'm sorry about this, but I thought this might get the point across a little bit better. This is an animation which I kind of did up based upon one of the work groups in ETC, which was looking at how do we create these dynamic peering relationships between different production partners in a given production. And the SDN control element that I'm showing here is actually kind of new. So as I was discussing before, you can either come from a private cloud or a provisioning engine that you already have. It might be intercloud, it might be a VMware-based infrastructure, might be a Microsoft or Google-based infrastructure, or you can come in from your workflow system and hit these APIs. The SDN control plane actually has a full set of cataloged APIs that would be published out so that this infrastructure knows what to do and what to call. And then from there, it spins off a routing instance, and you can spin up all types of different connectivity to and from different partners or actors in the production. So I might do, over the purple links, that's an Ethernet connection of some sort, or it might even be a localized connection to another actor in that data center, so we can do 1 gig, 10 gig, 100 gig connections at very low latency and very high speeds. But you can also provision out through over the black line into the service provider networks. And so what the service provider networks would do is this might be, let's take a Zayo who would use their Metropolitan Ethernet infrastructure to get you to other production partners, or maybe even back to studio so that you could do your checking in on the production, or you could get your dailies or other things. It also can get you connectivity out to shoot locations or other studio locations that you might want to get that connectivity to. And again, these are usually provisioned over Metropolitan Ethernet services. So the great thing about this is you're not trying to do circuits, they're not point-to-point, you're not constrained. You actually have a whole interesting plethora of service attributes that you can apply to those data flows. So if you want to apply things like compression or encryption, we can actually put that as a part of the chain of service and get it on the connection, again triggered through that SDN infrastructure. So one of our, in the work stream, one of our incredibly thoughtful guys put this together to kind of show how this would interact through an Equinix facility. So you have your different pre-production, production, and post-production workflows over here to the left. These are business-driven, and they may be a part of your normal way of doing things. But then they would go through a workflow management system like a Fifth Kind. And then from there, Fifth Kind would actually be able to provision the infrastructure to give you targets or endpoints to where that is going to go to. And so, a great example of this is I might get, a shot that needs to go to a visual effects house. It goes into the workflow. The workflow says, you know what, those guys are available to me, almost like a routing table, but it's more of a services routing table. And says they're available to me through the Equinix Exchange at this target. So it asked the Equinix Exchange to go ahead and set up that connection so that I can get that shot and everything else out to them on an on-demand basis. So again, the idea here is it takes business concepts and business flows and it lets you work in that space where you're comfortable, and then it lets you abstract the provisioning of your infrastructure to actually see that end-to-end service flow happen and make that to where it's programmatically built and is part of the network. So in summary, sorry, I know you guys wanted about 30 slides today. I tried to keep it down a little bit. First of all, just-in-time infrastructure is really important, but you need to think about some basic rules of it. And the first one is you leverage commodity resources or resource pools. Let someone else spend the CapEx. Let someone else make the long-term investments in order to put that infrastructure in place, and then let them give you access to it so that you can provision it to meet your needs. And this is the new model. This is the way that the clouds have built their infrastructure, and I'm going to tell you this is the way the networks will be consuming their infrastructure as we move along. The second one is make sure you provision via abstracted interfaces to allow for vendor diversity. So something I really didn't cover in here because we had a short period of time is by putting these abstracted interfaces in and these APIs, you can swap vendors out and still keep the function the same going northbound. This is really, really handy. I don't like this router vendor for this production, but I still want the same thing to be able to trigger out and say, go set up a BGP session and set up some connections for me. So by doing that orchestration and API transformation through the SDN infrastructure, I can give you Juniper today, I can give you Cisco tomorrow. Those types of things are really, really valuable. And again, it keeps you from getting locked into certain vendors, even when they're not in their optimal phase of delivering what you need for your production. The third one is select your providers based upon your neutrality of that provider and also their pre-integration and their ability to support these types of frameworks. Your provider, you have a right to expect better. Your provider should be asking you, what is it you need to do and how can I help your business? And right now, it is becoming a buyer's market for these resource pools. So you need to start thinking about, okay, if I'm in command, if I'm in the control seat here, how do I enforce upon my provider what I'm looking for to solve my business's problems for me? And then finally, exchange providers should provide you programmatic, low latency, high bandwidth access to the majority of the required resource pools that you have. Whether it's required resource pools from a cloud service provider, whether it's from a majority of those resource pools for your network service providers, whether it's to your production partners who you want to work with, you should actually, when you're shopping for that exchange provider, make sure that these providers are thinking about things from your perspective as a business. With that, I had 29 minutes and 15 seconds. That's awesome for 30 minutes. Any questions? Wow. I have one. Sure.
Sorry, in this scenario, are you guys providing the all the way down to the NFV? So basically, I just put dumb iron boxes in my production, and you provide firewalls and routing and all of that through your layer or through a third-party layer that you know. Like so how, you know, because one of the complicated things when deploying things for productions is that there's very, very minimal, you know, IT resources. Basically, there aren't any. You know, Warner Brothers IT does not deploy that. It might, but you know, same thing for any of the studios, basically. So on the production side, you know, is it literally, I am here, I will be here tomorrow. I need it to look like an enterprise IT environment and get me to all the other places that may be added or deleted some point through today.
Sure. So we do. There's a couple of different ways that we think about it. So the first way is if you just want those services applied to a flow that's going through the exchange, we have what we call service chaining. And I can either service chain through my own complex, which provides those NFV type of functions, or off of the exchange switch itself. Or I can actually service chain out because these are IP flows and go through cloud services, for example. So if you wanted to apply an Amazon, you know, Route 53 service to your flow for some reason, then we could actually help you to do that type of thing too. So again, the idea is I'm not stuck to where I have to give you the NFV function. I provide the capability to do that at scale because that's demanded of us by our customers. But at the same time, the goal should be as many third parties that can provide those services as possible to do so. So, you know, say there's an F5 or Fortinet who provide security services that really appeal to you for that production. They should be in my facility providing those services off of the exchange, and then I can do what's called service chaining and then service insertion. So I pick the flows that gets inserted on your behalf.
And through a common management and billing model, or? Well,
so the common management model, yes. The common billing model, we're working on that right now. So that's a bit more complex of a problem to solve. Yes. But right now, if you do have the relationship with that company, then you should be able to do those types of service chains. And that functionality, so I'm not overstepping that boundary, for us, for Equinix, is coming Q3, Q4 of this year, really in trial. So we can give you a couple of partners that we're pre-integrating at that point with these service chains if you want to try it out. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Hello. You mentioned that you could provision a company like Fortinet, but my question has to do with general, you know, security. And let's say, I mean, is part of the recommended package that you have a encryption or security service in there? Otherwise, what do you do? You know, what does a client do using all this services? You know, has anything been hacked? You know, Sony. You know, and because that's a great question. That's actually a really big concern. And since you're providing sort of an overall structure, well, there's a lot of elements to an overall structure. So I would think it would get pretty complex unless you offered a total package, a checkoff list, you know, that you need all these things.
So from Equinix's perspective, first of all, security is kind of a hornet's nest, and you know we all go kick it every now and again and get stung by it. But the reality of the situation is no productions or no two productions typically do security in the same way. So there's a couple of different things that are underway. First of all, I know there's a framework that Eric and the ETC are working through to try and get a more normalized security perspective on what to apply to productions. And if there are things that are put in there, then we'll work with third parties to get those integrated as a part of the exchange as well. But we don't typically try to apply security policy or anything else there unless it's something that you've asked it to do on your behalf as a customer. So long story short, yes, I think there are security concerns. If you look at the way we manage our infrastructure, it's audited and vetted. We're managed it in the same way you might get an MPLS infrastructure or any other layer 2 or layer 3 services that you get from your service provider. And we can provide you the ability to go through those audits and validate that. If you want to apply encryption on the per flow basis, that is something we're looking at. We'll probably be into next fiscal year before we really get that implemented. But that would be, the next logical step of abstraction, right, is to give you your data flows on a flow-by-flow basis and then be able to apply service assurance mechanisms such as encryption, or even validation types of things where you want to put some kind of snort or something in the middle to see what is going on with your traffic. Be able to do that either in the service pool that we apply or through a third-party service pool. Did that answer your question?
Web services is the big concern about web services in general. And just how is security happening when just about anybody can get in anywhere, it seems.
Well, and then one thing which I didn't, because I was trying not to shill too much here for Equinix. I wanted you guys to get a picture of what the general concepts were. But if you'll notice that there's storage here in the middle of this, and so the concept is this is actually, since this is a hub point that all of your infrastructure is going through, you can still maintain private storage and policy engines and firewalls and other things here, whether you want them as NFV or whether you want them as physical boxes, depending upon what you need. But the goal is to give you a place to apply your security policy. And that's probably the most important thing that we can provide. And then you can choose what the policy that you want to apply, and we can work together either with the third parties or with infrastructure we provide straight off of the exchange itself. But the goal again is to try and get, and this came up not only from giving you policy application, but these assets as they keep getting larger and larger, even with 10 or 100 gig connectivity, it almost becomes infeasible to start shipping assets back around. So one of the great things about being a really low latency play is I can give you things like 4 millisecond round trips to some of the cloud services, so you could split your storage from your compute. If you want to do compute in the cloud and you want to do storage locally in a piece of equipment that you control all the policy on, then you can do that, and you can do things like golden images and other stuff. So there's a lot of different ways to address this. I think what we're waiting on right now is some of those frameworks to come out where they're applied equally across, and we can say, yes, we are this high to ride this ride, and then from there, what do we customize on top of that for your given production? Any other questions? Awesome. I've lulled you into submission. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it.